Sakura webinar. This one is on quality management in histology. And before we get started on this particular webinar, there are a few things that we need to think about and understand. First of all, you have to be thinking in a system method. You need to kind of open yourself up to new things, new ideas. And the whole basis for this particular presentation, when we talk about quality management in histology, is if you take a standardized approach, you will lead yourself to standardized results. So, with that, let's get started. All right, quality management in histology. What is quality management? Well, it's a little bit of what we've been doing in histology, but it's even more. It is really what we're talking about is developing a controlled method. And within that controlled method, you have to have some certain functions. And what we're really trying to do here to create a quality management system in histology is to combine quality planning, which is probably one of the hardest things for all of us to do, quality control, which we're all doing and should be doing, quality assurance, which most of us do, and we can probably do a little bit more. And when you put those together, the quality planning, quality control, with the quality assurance, you're going to create that loop-back process, which will give us continuous quality improvement. So again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a method. And when you put these four functions together and you do them consistently and over again in your laboratory, you're going to see three main improvements. Product improvement, which is what for us the product is block, slide, and stain. Process improvement, that's our procedures, our policies, and yes, standardization. We have to create more standardization if we want to really improve our quality. And then one of the most important parts, which often can be overlooked, is people improvement, training and competency, not just having people do the work, but properly preparing them through training and properly evaluating them through competency. So again, a controlled method. It's an all-inclusive method. It's not just one part. It's putting all the parts together. So what are some of the methods out there? You've probably heard about them. Certainly Six Sigma, which is definitely a data-driven defect reduction process. It's very detailed and has a lot of documentation with that. You've all probably heard of the Toyota production system, Lean. And today, those two, since they are so very similar, have been kind of combined into Lean Six Sigma. And that really is one of the methods also. And then if you go back several years to the beginning of quality management and Deming, the PDCA, that's Plan, Do, Check, and Act. And when you think about it, plan, do, check, and act, a lot of people, a lot of us, a lot of our labs in histology, we're probably informally doing that part. But most importantly, one of the methods out there is ISO 15189 for medical labs. It is the next step on the ladder, and it's something that we all need to become very well aware of. Next slide. So again, what are the major components? We're talking about four of them. That's quality planning. Again, very hard to do, but absolutely necessary if you're going to create that quality management system. Quality control. Again, as I said before, we're probably all doing it. It is absolutely necessary, but we probably need to do even a little more than what you're used to. Quality assurance is trying to then evaluate and look at your quality control, and I know we probably need to do a little bit more of that. And then with those three, you get that quality improvement, and it's actually continuous quality improvement. It forces you to look at what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you can continue to do that better. So that's quality improvement. And with those four major components, there are some basic principles that you need to consider and grasp. And the most important is everything that you do in your laboratory, from the moment you arrive to the moment you leave, has to be customer focused. You've probably heard a lot about that, but it really is focusing everything that you do to what the customer really wants. And sometimes you have to ask the customer. One of the difficulties in histology, though, with customer focus is that we're not fortunate enough to have just one customer. We will have multiple customers. Typically, your pathologist is your first customer, but then you have clinicians, surgeons, and certainly the patient. So in histology, quality management systems and quality management itself even becomes more difficult because we're not able to focus on just one customer. The other key principle is involvement of people. Everybody must participate. Everybody has to have the same level of responsibility for the quality of work that's performed each and every time, or you really can't have success. And you have to kind of look at a system approach. And an example of that in histology is that you have to look how everything interacts. And when something works well or doesn't work well, how does it interact and affect the system? So technique, we're very good and technical about having a problem approach in histology. A technique would be you've got bubble under your cover glass. When you're saying, what do? Being technical people, we fix that. That's a technique approach. System approach is what caused it, why did it happen, was it the wrong consistency of the mounting media, were there the right chemicals, did the right person do the right thing at the right time to not create those bubbles under there, and how do you back up either a step 1 or 2 to make sure that that doesn't happen. That's the system approach. And then continual improvement. That's with that quality improvement, the continual improvement is that what you do today is not necessarily what you're going to do tomorrow. And you really have to embrace that concept because you have to look at each and every day what you're doing, why you're doing it. And it sounds kind of simple, but you got to ask yourself, how can we do it better? So that's that in continual improvement. Next slide. So of those major components, when we go back and we start talking about quality planning, it's an approach. And that's really important because that's what you have to do as an individual. You have to have an approach that develops quality policy into measurable objectives and requirements. If you don't set up standards and you don't use standardization, how can you really be very objective? You know, I think this slide looks okay, or does this slide meet a very rigid and stringent set of criteria? And when you set up that develop that quality policy, it will define those sequence of steps for success within a specified time frame. So it is really important that you think through this part of the process before you move to the next, which is quality control. Now, the quality control is a very specific process employed to make sure your products and services are of, and this is a key point, are of a minimal level of quality. The quality control we do when you run a control slide with your staining, or you run a control slide as your for your H&E staining or IHC staining. What you're not looking for the highest, best possible quality. That quality control of your process, that one slide control that we do, is really looking at and setting what the minimal acceptable level of quality is, which means if it doesn't meet that, we're not turning it out. It doesn't mean that it's our best. And typically quality control, just as I just described, will involve examination of the product and services. So quality control is really about setting minimal acceptable level of quality. Next slide. So continuing on with the major components. Then quality assurance. You know, when you think about quality control, then broaden your outlook, broaden your approach, and that is the wider concept that defines the specific steps of verifying or determining whether products and services meet or exceed the customer expectation. And when we get to customer expectations, you're starting to get away from minimal level, acceptable level of quality, more to the higher standard of quality. That's exactly what the customer expectation is. That's your expectation. That's my expectation. That's everybody's expectation. If you go to buy something, you're looking to buy the highest quality. I can't remember the last time I went in someplace and said, just give me your minimal acceptable quality product. So quality assurance is taking the next step from quality control, which sets the baseline, to moving it to the higher quality. And then quality improvement, which is very, very important in a quality management system in histology, is the systematic approach. And again, that's the systematic approach is you have to make sure that everything is interrelated and how it interconnects before you can really understand how to fix things. And you're all about trying to reduce and doing a reduction or elimination of waste. In histology, our biggest waste is time and or rework. And in today's laboratory, you need to be aware of what your workflow is and any loss in the production process. Loss in the production process is an unacceptable slide, an unacceptable stain. Loss of production in your production process is definitely a waste, and it's rework. So quality improvement is not looking at the bubble under the cover slip, as we discussed, but what went into creating that bubble under the cover slip, and how do I adjust steps prior so that bubble does not create again. There we go. So, why do we do this in histology? There is a definite customer demand for us to improve what we're doing, and it's very difficult to do this just with your normal daily individual task quality control. It really doesn't tie the whole picture together and give you that broader set of information so that you can really understand what is causing the issue and how do you correct it. Patient care. Patient care is, I don't know, it's number one on look at any internet site, look at any newspaper. Patient care came up again. We're discussing again whether to have the particular health care bill we have now or not, and repeal it, to change it, but patient care is on everybody's minds. And your competition is employing it. All the way back in August of 2008, Peabody Medical Laboratories, they achieved ISO 159 certification. They've now been purchased by another larger entity that came from outside the U.S. And in January 2009, Avera McKenna Hospital achieved ISO 159 certification. That's a whole hospital system achieved that, and they are being a leader in quality as we move forward. And it really is important to you, to me, to all of us, that we create personal development. To do this, it's not easy. There's a lot of obstacles. There are lack of standards for us in histology. There are good standardized reagents. We all have good standardized processes in our particular labs, but we do have a lack of standards and interoperability. So there's really no real sharing of our information from institution to institution. I find that we have a lack of documentation. When you move into a quality management system, your level of documentation really has to go up. You really have to make sure that you have captured everything. So, and you need document control in that documentation. We have subjective quality, and that happens with a manual process and what we are producing. There is some movement now to move us away from that subjective quality. Now, with more and more digital pathology, we're going to have to see more standardized, acceptable quality limits. If you're doing HER2-neu imaging for HER2-neu, there is a much higher standard of quality for that particular test that is starting to spread through the rest of histology. Misunderstanding of the process. When you talk about quality management system, people say, oh, you know, it's taken away some of my creativity. It's taken away some of the, you know, my artistic values. It's just to somehow punish me. And that's really not what a quality management system is about. It's about trying to find where issues are and how to correct those, again, for better patient care. You have to learn some statistics. Doing averages and some, you know, collecting what data you have and just doing some quick arithmetic calculations isn't going to do it for you. You got to do the statistics to really see what's happening and how these little changes can make big changes in quality. And again, everyone must participate. That is probably one of the most difficult obstacles to get around. So we talk about lack of standards. You know, each task, each step in the process, you've got to try to reduce waste. You need to understand what directly affects your cost of poor quality. If you don't have that number, that equation, that factor now in your laboratory, I suggest you learn more about it. It's difficult for us to discuss this here in just 1 hour, but cost of poor quality is just a killer in your laboratory. Lack of documentation. You've got to create a document control process. There are automated systems out there that can do that. You can also create that on your own, but it is important when you get into a quality management system that not only do you document everything, but you document who has worked the documents, who has reviewed the documents, who has responsibility to perform the tasks that are in those documents, and that all of that, again, is closing the loop in a quality management system. Your documentation reduces variation. Reducing variation reduces your rework, reduces your cost, will bring down that cost of poor quality. That's one of the, again, major challenges that we have is reducing that variation. And there's no getting around it. You have to identify each step of your process what defects you have. And they have to be identified before you can move to correction. So you have to have traceability of all these steps. But if you look at other industries and other sections of healthcare where they have moved to quality management systems, that is one of the mandates that is absolutely necessary for doing a quality management system, is that you have to have the traceability of all steps of what you did, how you did it, what went wrong, what you did to correct it, and how that helped improve your process. Subjective quality. What I find in a lot of times that we have issues with is that we too often allow ourselves to have one-point quality control. That's at the end by our pathologist or at the end of staining by someone who is reviewing. So you need to get away from one-point or end-point quality control. That does not give you a good indicator of what's happening at a particular task that does need to be controlled. You have to validate each technical process, and you need to document that validation. You can't just interchange a solution. You can't just decide to make a change to timing or temperature, concentration, without testing against the existing model that you have before you move to the new one. And everyone must be responsible for quality. If you're the supervisor, if you're attending this and you're the supervisor, absolutely you have responsibility for quality in your department, but everyone else who works in that should have the same level of responsibility that you do. And they must have. And they must have the same authority to make changes, to identify issues and be part of the correction process. Misunderstanding the process. You know, we've gone over this before. It must always be used to improve the process and the people. This is not a punitive thing. This is not going to restrict people. Again, this is about people and process development. It's going to help more than hinder. But people must be aware of defects before they can improve. If you're doing something wrong and no one tells you that you're doing something wrong, you'll continue to do that until someone points it out for you. And that's exactly what quality management system is about. And people have to improve before your process can improve. So pretty much, like the dominoes being laid out as you move forward. You have to identify what your issues and defects are before you can move to the people in the process development. Statistics. I had to learn a lot about statistics, and you will have to. You have to have an understanding. You got to be able to use them. Means, modes, Pareto charts, histograms, everything else, but you have to understand just exactly what you're looking at. Averages just don't do it for you anymore. Simple math just won't work. You have to learn how to create charts. Small performance and process changes can affect quality quickly and much more greatly than the small changes. And then everyone must participate. It's got to be top down, bottom up. You have to understand that it's from the CEO or the COO or the director, whoever your top person in your laboratory, all the way down to the brand new hire. It has to be moving in both ways, that everybody participates and everybody has the same level of responsibility for quality in your laboratory. It has to be voluntary. You can't force anybody to do this, and you can't force a quality management system on anybody. Removing the division of labor, what you're talking about is cross-training. So if you have people in your laboratory, you can't let the process, you can't let anything actually stop or not continue because it's, quote, not my job. So by removing that division of labor, that does help you to get everybody to participate. It is a little bit more of a work to do that, to do the cross-training and create that atmosphere, but it is much more beneficial to your laboratory. And it creates change for the better, not just for change, but change for the better. Because again, if you're looking at this in a system approach, and a quality management system does ask you always to look at how everything interacts and why you're doing something, you always will create change for the better. So if you see a trend where you're making some sort of defect, some sort of error, the stain is inconsistent, it does not, maybe your first impression is that it's a person. First impressions aren't always the best, and that's what the quality management system helps you understand. It could be the procedure is written incorrectly. It could be that the training was done incorrectly. That's what the quality management system helps you to do. It's process and it's people improvement. So we're on page 11 as everybody else has been moving around. I'm sorry. So what do we do? You got to commit to a method. So you got to pick out one. Don't try to do two. Don't try to combine them, but choose one. And there's many to choose from. My experience has been in what is now called Six Sigma Lean. I know that's just contrary to what I told you, but that's two processes, but the two processes are so very, very similar that now a lot of people are calling it Six Sigma Lean. You need to communicate to everyone. You got to let everybody know what the goal is, what you're trying to achieve, and what their part is. Small changes lead to success. You don't have to throw your whole process, your whole laboratory into turmoil. You can start small and build on the gains. And then never underestimate the culture and the people factors in your laboratory. Of all those other obstacles, the culture and the people factor can be big, big obstacles for you. One of the things that I suggest is that trying to create what is commonly known as quality circles. It's small groups of people who perform the work. So if it's histotechs who are doing microtomy, there needs to be a quality circle around microtomy. They're the ones performing the work. They're the ones who know whether or not your procedures actually are stating what they're doing each and every day. This encourages craftsmanship. Now, beginning here I said something about, artistic, it can hinder my artistic abilities, possibly. I look at art as art, not part of science, and I consider this part of science. But it does encourage craftsmanship. If you do that as an individual, it can be very costly. But if you create craftsmanship around your whole process, your whole laboratory, that can be very, very beneficial. It encourages involvement and participation by everyone because they're responsible for helping to identify, absolutely responsible for helping to come up with the solutions, and responsible for implementing those solutions. So it's no longer, here's a problem, they give it to somebody else needs to fix it. They are part of the whole process. it supports your continuous improvement, and again, it creates change for the better. And that's what we're trying to do. Quality management systems in histology is trying to create change for the better, not just change for change's sake. Slide 12. So we're going to go through a couple of diagrams that you need to become aware of. Number one is everybody always talks about a fishbone diagram, Ishikawa diagram. There's a lot of things, but you need to know about how these fishbones. And what this really is telling you is that it creates a way for you to lay out and show the interaction of your policies, your procedures, your production, which can be plant, and the people. And you work out what the cause and why do you do these things. But it really gives you that system understanding. Slide 13 is a little bit more of a detailed fishbone diagram. We have measurement, what the people are, the machines, what your quality problems, and what it is you start from the right and you work backwards. So your quality problem is over on the right, and you work your way backwards to all the different things that you think may be contributing to the good and the bad of your process. Again, just an example. Pareto charts, you may or may not have seen these, but you need to understand how to chart out and trend. Visual, being very visual for yourself, if you're helping to organize this plan, and visual for the people who are participating. A simple chart, what's that term? A picture's worth 1,000 words. Putting together a chart and posting these and getting everybody involved can help a lot of people understand quickly what issues are and where we need to concentrate our energy. And again, these are just done just to introduce them to you. Slide 15, histograms, and the reason I put the histogram in here is that standard deviation, histogram, some of these things have been used for years and decades in the clinical laboratory, not always used in histology, where we can be a very simplified process and a simplified quality process. Again, quality management system, what I'm trying to tell you and promote is that we need to have more of a detailed approach to what we do. It'd be very good. So you need to start understanding how the statistics and the math behind what we do can be very, very helpful to you and help you control what you're doing. Again, the next step is you've got to lay out a process map of what you're doing in your particular department, in your particular laboratory, from drop-off to turnaround time. With the pathologist, you need to understand how long it takes you to do each of these steps and what your wait time is in between the steps. Process chart is and process map is one of the first steps. Here's another, on number 17, here's another example of a process map, with the process being in the middle and output and customers, input and suppliers. Another way of looking at it, but it helps you put it down on paper and understand who does what and how they're involved and how it affects each and every block and slide that you produce. Slide 18 is a little bit more of again, another form, another detail of process mapping. But if you look at the bottom, it tells you from each step what the tops of those peaks and valleys are. The tops are what you're actually spending at the time of the task, and the bottoms is what the wait time is in between. Typically, once you understand your process, you start attacking the wait times. Number 19. So where do you start? Well, you got to start with documentation. You got to have a document control process. If you have a standard operating procedure, you need to, again, close the loop. You need to know who created it, when they created it, who it's created for, who has reviewed it, when they reviewed it, and when they implement it, when you implement this. So you've got to have that document control. You need specific procedures and protocols for everything. Sometimes just the SOP is not enough. I'm also been involved in CAP inspections. You go in and all I have is the SOP. Well, that's no longer acceptable for us if you are CAP inspected or CLIA inspected. You have to prove that not only do you have standard operating procedure, but how that was arrived at, who reviewed it, who actually implements that, and that you have control of that whole thing. Competency. Training documentation is very, very important. After you write your SOP, by creating that training documentation for the procedure, a lot of times that will lead you to go back and correct or adjust your SOP before you even put it out. And then there's competency documentation. It's the next step in quality management is that you write an SOP, somebody reads it. I'm pretty sure that's happening in almost all of our labs. Maybe you use a mentor. Do you use a specific trainer? But is there documentation of how that training happened, how that training took place, and feedback from the training? And then competency is once someone's been trained at performing a task, what is their level? Can they perform it without assistance and a mentor? Can they perform it within the quality standards and or production standards that you set? And then finally, can they perform a particular task to the level to where they can be a trainer themselves? Document all control processes. So you've got to have this documentation. That's part of the biggest, one of the obstacles that people say, I don't know if I want to get into this quality management, but you've got to do that. Validation. It's something that we don't do very formally in histology. If you're running a good immunohistochemistry lab within your histology laboratory, you're very well aware of validation. My question is, most often to everyone, is why aren't you doing the same level of quality control, quality assurance, and quality validation that you do in that area of the lab for the rest of the lab? And that's the level that you need to bring it to the rest of your histology lab. Test all your technical procedures before you implement. You never change a process without testing to old process, and no change is too small to test or validate. Again, somebody swap out a different bottle of hematoxylin in your stainer, that needs to be tested before you put that into implementation. Your traceability. This is very, very important. This is part of your document control and how you do this, but you have to set up quality checks for each task. Again, you can't accept that we ran a quality control slide at the beginning of the day and we ran out our slides the rest of the day, or you wait for pathologists. You need to look at where the critical to failure steps are in your process and set up regular quality checks. The idea of a quality control check is to identify and recognize when you're not meeting your minimum performance standards before it affects your end result. You have to identify your defects as close to occurrence as possible. That's what the multiple quality steps will do for you. Send your defects back to the person that created it. The best way to correct an issue and or reduce the number and occurrence of those defects is to get it back to the person who actually created it. Now that's a very broad statement, but it actually means to get it back to them and get them involved, whether there is a training opportunity, to whether there is just a mentoring opportunity, whatever it is, but they need to be aware as soon as possible what that defect was, and so that you can come to the correct conclusion. And then set quality and production expectations. If you're working within that quality management system, you have to have quality and production expectations for every measurable and critical task that you have in the laboratory. Defects. This is what a lot of us don't like to talk about. All of you, most of you will probably say that we don't have any issues in my laboratory. I'm going to say that's probably, I'm going to say that is 100% incorrect. It's a manual process. What my experience has been and what I've been trained to understand is that with a manual process, it's quite understandable to have anywhere between 1 and 2% defect or error rate. Think about that. 1 or 2% of your slides or blocks or stains each and every day have some sort of procedural, technical, quality defect in it. That seems unacceptable. That is unacceptable. Our goal is always 0, but it is happening. So it's important that you identify, document, and trend what those are. Again, this is not a punitive thing, but it's a way of improving, continuous continuous quality improvement, process and people improvement. You can't know what type or where defects occur until you document them. You have to be consistent, and you have to make sure that you understand exactly what's happening. Everybody has to be responsible for the quality again, and defects are directly linked to your cost of poor quality. And that's very, very important in these times where you're trying to be the most efficient, the most productive. Everyone has asked you to control your costs. Well, how do you control your costs when you don't even know where you're bleeding in your costs? So what are the benefits? And again, this is a general overview. This is trying to get you to understand and be thinking about, how do I set up a quality management system in histology? It is very involved, but there are a lot of benefits that you will realize. It's not going to be easy. It never is. When you make a change, whether it's a procedure, process, or what we're actually talking about now is a cultural change. So it's not going to be easy, but there are big rewards sitting out there for you when you move to this system approach. If we're talking about customer focus, which what we should all be doing, we'll have improved patient care. And you're going to be thinking to yourself right now, well, we turn out the best slides there are. But there's always room for improvement, and any improvements that you can affect in your laboratory will ultimately improve your patient care. Think of it, if you can reduce one recut, reduce one repeat of a stain, or one incidence where you have to add extra stains because information is inconclusive, if you can help to affect that, you're directly affecting improved patient care. Standardization at any and all your steps will reduce your variation, and that creates less waste. And the two biggest wastes that you have in your laboratory are time, loss of time, and the defects, which is directly linked to loss of time. Quality becomes more consistent. Again, a standardized approach leads to standardized results. Minimum quality, a level of quality will raise and improve, absolutely. Even the smallest changes can help you move that minimum level of quality. And your pathologist will become much, much more efficient. Not only will the pathologist become efficient, but everyone who's performing their task. If they can do it consistently, each and every time the same way, everyone becomes more efficient and more acceptable to this change. I was at another seminar that I heard where I was learning some more of these techniques, and a statement was made that really just stuck with me. I heard an individual say that just doing the science is not enough anymore. It's not enough for us to be just supervisors. We must learn to move to managers and leaders. And the dependence of science on technology will grow relentlessly. So from the basic application of and calculations all the way up through these big, large black box measurements that we have, such as digital pathology and quality management flow software and that, they will lead you to understand, just as quality management systems will lead you to understand, that paper notebooks and paper lists are becoming increasingly obsolete. We don't want to be part of that obsolescence, but the whole part of that was that just doing the science is not enough anymore. Let's move on to total participation. And when we talk about total participation, you'll be amazed how the involvement raises employee satisfaction. Think of it, how many times in your laboratory has somebody said, gee, I wish the supervisor, I wish they would change that, or I wish they would do something about that. Well, when you move to a quality management system, the they is them. They have the power to help move that, and they see that they have that power, and that really gives them a high level of satisfaction. productivity increases in your laboratory without asking anybody to do anything harder, faster. And that's always good. Creating better productivity. Change happens for the better again. And your culture changes and expands to accept continual improvement. That's the one that will happen last, and that can happen sometimes a little bit slower. After the system approach, you have the system thinking and the problem solving. That's what really happens, is that you find that everyone's involved in the problem solving, and that's what's really important and what really is helpful in the quality management system, is that something doesn't continue on for an hour, for a shift, for days, for weeks, that might be incorrect. People identify when things are incorrect, and they know that they can affect the change. So you continually have this improvement in your quality. And the process, and this could be a little bit misleading. Process could be self-managing. The people can be a little bit self-managing, but it does take management of the total process, or it will drift. But they all become very, very active participants. And then your continuous improvement. It's the process will evolve. You eliminate the suboptimal process. It's another way of, you eliminate the defects. Anytime you can eliminate even the smallest defects, your quality, your patient care will always improve. Your employees begin to recommend change. And that's what you're really trying to do with your quality management system. If you've had a recent visit by CAP inspection, they're no longer spending a lot of time coming in and reading your manuals. Yes, they review your manuals, but they want to come into your laboratory. They want to talk to the people on the bench and say, what do you do? How do you do it? What happens when you have a problem? It's great that you have it in an SOP, but if you don't have the involvement of your people, you really don't have a good quality lab. And then small changes are always easier to implement. As we get to the end of it, and we can wrap this up, is that, what is quality management again? It's that controlled method. And it is very important that you create that controlled method and do those incorporate the 4 principles, which is quality planning. And if you don't plan, it's hard to do. So you have to do the quality planning. You have to continue your quality control and probably even make that a little bit more robust. Your quality assurance needs to continue and increase, and then commit to and create that continuous quality improvement. It doesn't mean that you're going to have changes hourly, daily, weekly. The changes come as needed, and again, when you get ready to make a change, you have to go back into your process and look to validate that change and understand before you make that first impression about what the change is. So again, what you're talking about with quality management systems in histology, you're talking about product improvement. Very important, very necessary to us being technical people, making sure the block, slide, and stain are superior product. Process improvement, making sure that what we have on paper is what we actually told people to do and is what they're actually doing. So that's your process improvement. And then the people improvement. Training and competency provides them the opportunity to completely understand, to become very proficient in what they do, and give them that satisfaction, which leads to the overall satisfaction of the department, of the company. And again, it leads to increased quality. If you're satisfied and like what you're doing, you'll have a better outcome each and every day. And then you got to document. You got to have documented processes. I'm probably thinking that most of us have to have more documentation than what we have now. You do create consistency through standardization. Everything you end up doing in your laboratory is customer focused. And again, remember what we talked about at the beginning, is that for us it is a little bit more of a minefield to walk through because we have multiple customers. But you can't just please the pathologist. You've got to make sure that what you're doing, what he's turning out, actually meets the customer and the patient needs that pass them. And then, again, you get that employee satisfaction. So I know this was a quick overview. It's very hard to pull all of this into. There are so many different tools that can help you and lead you to success. But quality management systems are, you know, they're necessary. In this day and age, they're necessary. And it's also necessary for us to move forward in histology so that we can move to more automation. We have a lot of automated products, but we need more automation to help us become even better and more consistent. So again, thank you. And let's see, we'll go to slide 24. We'll talk about that a little bit, but Ms. Alicia, what else do we need to do?
Well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate your time this morning and presenting an excellent webinar on quality management in histology. Well, I would like to address some of the questions that came about during the presentation. And the question is, do you have any suggested resources specifically for QMS in histology?
Well, the resources is you have to go out, the first step is you have to go out and find that method. There are many books, many things on the internet, maybe even in your own institution. If you have a quality management department in your institution, I would imagine that someone already has access to or is participating in Six Sigma or Lean. So if you're in a larger institution, I will tell you to look within your institution. We're one of the last areas of histology that are trying to move into this quality management, but many other areas, especially if you're in the hospital, nursing, surgery, even the clinical lab has embraced and moved into quality management process and systems. So that's one place. The internet is always a great resource. And then there are very many other webinars, seminars that you can take through the state societies, NSH, and again through such as Socorro. But before you set your quality planning, you need to set what method you're going to try to follow, and then get directed specific resources on that method.
Well, thank you. Once again, I would like to thank our audience for attending today's webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me after the webinar. Thank you so much, Bill, for your time.
Thank you, and thank everyone out there. Thank you.